Hello and welcome once again to another one of our health informative podcasts, women's health, obviously, that's what we're focusing on. And today we're finding out about the gender health gap, and I'm pleased to be joined by Jo Ward, someone I've had the pleasure of working with on many an occasion. How are you, Jo?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for inviting me back.
Great, great. Always good to see you. Now then, let's take a look at this first of all, the gender health gap. Now, your department, you do lots and lots of things. And recently I was actually speaking to somebody about this very same subject, and I was a bit astounded by it, to be honest with you, because you get gender inequality in the obvious areas, like, women advancing up the ladder in the corporate world, but the health thing is equally just as bad. So tell us a little bit about, first of all, what you do, Jo, and then tell us about the gender health gap, if you would, please.
I work across health and the creative sector to look at how we can develop novel types of interventions to support well-being. So it's very much around health creation, but it's also about looking at gaps within medicine where we can't support people now because there isn't a pharmaceutical intervention or we don't have a traditional method of treatment, and that we might want to develop something new. So a really good example is, for example, dementia. So at the moment, there's no magic bullet or magic pill, but actually, from a social prescribing perspective, what that means is that you look at what the assets people still have rather than what they've lost. So, yes, people may be losing their memory, and there may have been some changes within their personality, etc. But actually, social prescribing, and particularly a creative health agenda, helps us to think about basically how can we make the most of what we still have. So it could be around introducing dance, so it provides some respite care for the carer, but also means that they have some social activities that both the carer and the person living with dementia can actually attend. But it's much more than that. It's not just about social activity. What has been happening with regard to things like social prescribing is some of our clinicians have started to think, well, if we run a community dance group, we can see a group of individuals who might have the same condition. And by watching them in dance and almost in play, we can actually understand whether there's been any deterioration, and whether there are any issues around basically balance that might cause trips and falls.
Mm.
And equally as importantly, we can support the carers because we can bring groups of carers together who actually then get that social connection with other people that understand what's going on in their lives. And that's really important because without carers, the NHS would fall over.
Oh,
So
yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
range of different interventions for different scenarios. And what it's dependent on is a really detailed conversation with a patient about what's going on in their lives, not just about the disease. So
Yeah.
it really changes the conversation. So whereas often sometimes people say when you go in relation to something that's ongoing in terms of a health condition, it feels like it's about the health condition, not you as the person. And social prescribing changes the conversation. So
Yeah.
somebody that accesses social prescribing would have a conversation with a social prescribing link worker or a community connector. And it'd be really detailed conversation about what's going on in their lives, and how their lives are impacting on a condition, and really trying to get underneath the symptoms to what's the cause of the cause.
Yeah, got it. Well, here's the interesting thing, Jo. What I want to find out about as well. You come up with some great things there. That ways in which this can be dealt with. But give me a few examples of, if you like, gender health gap in action. Give me maybe some statistics or something like that we can have a look at.
Yeah. Well, quite sadly, the UK's got the biggest gender health gap. And I know most people say, well, what does that mean? And really, it's very similar to the pay gap. It means that women do less well in the healthcare system, but also because of our biology, we also have a tendency for a prevalence of a range of diseases that are quite different than men, that are often not recognised. So, in relation to the types of issues, the data is quite shocking in relation to, say, blindness, that women are much more likely to be blind than men. And that again is to do with biology. It's sometimes to do with maternity journeys, etc., but also autoimmune disorders. So when you look at the prevalence of autoimmune disorders, basically, women are much more likely to experience those disorders, which impact on everyday life. Um, the other areas that are really quite interesting is that we don't do that much research on women. They tend to not be included in clinical trials because our hormones are seen to complicate issues. But our hormones are really quite significant because they interplay with some of the solutions that may be brought to the fore further down the line. And that means that basically we often aren't fully aware about hormonal changes that might impact on prescriptions we receive, and that can cause problems for the
Yeah.
person taking the drugs. So there's a lack of research and knowledge about women and the types of conditions we're most likely to experience, but also there's a lack of knowledge about the impact of the existing treatments or the opportunities for developing new types of treatments that would actually benefit the wider population, because if it works for some women, it may well work for the wider population, i.e., the men in the population and other people that identify in terms of different gender orientation.
Yeah, there's an interesting personal story that you have, which kind of demonstrated, where the kind of gender health gap comes into it in terms of treatment. Tell us about the episode with the football player.
Yeah, it was really interesting that I was running late and rushing for a bus, and where I live, there's still quite a few cobble streets, and one of the sets was missing. And I went down the cobble and twisted my ankle and ended up in A&E. And I was hanging around in A&E for quite a while. I'd had an initial assessment and was waiting for an X-ray, and must have been there a couple of hours. And then a young lad came in who'd been playing football and had hurt himself, and he was whisked off quite quickly. And while I'd been waiting, I'd asked several times if I could have some kind of painkiller because I was in quite a lot of pain. And I kept being told, yeah, we'll sort it out. Anyway, this young lad came back, and I was sort of curious as to where he'd been. And he said, "Oh, they've just been checking me over, and I've got some painkillers." And I was curious and went away afterwards, and because it never really left me, because I felt discriminated against. Really, it was like, is it because I'm older, or is it because I'm a woman, or is it both? And if you look at the research, basically, for women to receive pain relief in an A&E in the UK, you have to wait 2 hours longer than a man, even with,
Really?
for a similar condition. And
Wow.
the researchers seem to think there's a whole range of mythology about women having higher pain thresholds, and therefore, when we're asking for medication, we're sometimes dismissed. Um, but it's well researched and evidence in every other place as well. So if you look at the US, it's slightly worse. And again, in Europe, the same issues, that women are much less likely to get pain relief. And I think that's
Mm.
a really good example of what we mean by the gender health gap.
Yeah.
So not only are we less likely to be properly diagnosed, we also find that sometimes that we're not getting the treatment we need. But when we
Yeah.
do get the treatment, because we're not in the clinical trials, we also are much likely to experience harm because the hormones that are coursing through our veins impact on how we metabolize medications.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, hopefully, in the not too distant future, that kind of imbalance will be corrected. And of course, things that people have been listening to today, then, Joe, if people want to find out more about, the services that are available, how can they do that?
Well, I'm absolutely delighted to say that we have two publications coming out on the 8th of March to mark International Women's Day. One is the first ever Cheshire and Merseyside Women's Health Strategy, and that will be available on the Improving Me website. So if you just Google Improving Me, then you'll find that, and that will be up there on Friday. And that explains a bit more about some of the issues that are presenting and what the NHS is going to be prioritising over the next few years. And then we also have a partnership with the Liverpool City Region Combined Authority, the Healthy Economies team, and we're launching a publication for employers, which will be looking at what types of things can happen in the workplace to ensure that they basically are able
Mm.
to retain women. And it's a range of practical solutions and toolkits that they can access. But the biggest thing is, how do we encourage conversations about women's health issues in the workplace? And again, the actual publication contains lots of useful tips and focuses quite heavily on the value of having local libraries and with resources and some of the books they contain that can open up some of the conversations for whether it's book clubs or discussion groups, and or some of the digital resources in terms of podcasts. So there's a lot of things out there, but I think the biggest problem is no one knows where they are. So hopefully these two publications will help to signpost people to some of the experts and some of the resources to have those conversations.
Yeah, got it. And of course, little information podcasts like this will go some way for people to find out about that information. Jo, it's always a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks to Jo, of course. And there are a number of the podcasts that you'll see on the Improving Me social media pages at the moment on a variety of subjects. So make sure you check them out. And we look forward to catching up with you again in the not too distant future.